Welcome to the Country Music Unknown Legends podcast. I'm your host, John Mathis Jr. On the Unknown Legends podcast, we are going to take a look at some of the artists and musicians that pop culture has passed by and are all but forgotten. At one time, these guys were doing shows, traveling, releasing records to radio, and had fans who loved their music. They were making a living, living the dream. They were right there in the formative years of country music, performing and working with others who became legends. Today, we're going to take a look at one of those unknown legends. We're going to take a look at Okie Jones. I love that name. It actually caught my attention while doing some research on my father's career. My dad is Country Johnny Mathis, and I was discovering artists who had recorded his songs, so I ran across a recording by Okie Jones of the song You're Just Imagination. I wasn't familiar with Okie Jones, but with a name like Okie, it certainly made me curious. In fact, I'm going to give Okie some credit with tipping me over the edge on deciding to start this podcast. As I began to research Okie's career, I thought about him. I thought about all the others like him who were there. They were there during that great era of country music in the 50s. That to me was a formative decade, as there was this transition from the labels of hillbilly music or country and western or even western folk music to just country music. Okie was not Okie's real name, and my first guess was that he was probably from Oklahoma, but I was wrong. He was actually born Otho Eugene Jones in Fort Worth, Texas on August the 14th, 1930. His parents were Howard Rufus Jones and Ina Rue Francis Jones. Okie was one of 4 children, and I don't know much about Okie's early childhood, but the early 30s in Texas was a tough life for a lot of folks. The country was only a decade away from the Great Depression, and people were still working hard just to make ends meet. I do know that many young Texas boys in that area were influenced growing up in the 30s by the music of Jimmie Rodgers, Gene Autry, Bob Wills, Jimmy Davis, and others, and you can hear the influence of that music in their early 50s recordings. Speaking of music, it was in 1949 that Okie Jones made his first recordings for Bill Quinn's Gold Star record label out of Houston. 2 songs were released, Stop, Look, and Listen and Foolish Heart, but not under the name of Okie Jones. They were released as Gene Jones. Now I imagine that came from Okie's middle name of Eugene. It is possible that through Bill Quinn of Gold Star Records that Okie landed a recording contract with Columbia Records. Now, Columbia Records is one of the oldest labels in existence that was originally founded as the Columbia Phonograph Company in 1889. And Columbia Records had committed to doing hillbilly recordings by the late 20s and 30s, recording and releasing music by artists like Gene Autry and Bob Wills, among others. Okie recorded 12 songs on Columbia Records from 1950 to 1952. None of those became big hits for Okie, but he landed on places like the Big D Jamboree in Dallas, Texas, performing some of those songs like Love Fever. It was around 1952 that Okie took a break from his music career. The Korean War had broke out in 1950. It was still going on, so Okie joined the Army and went and served in Korea. When he returned to the U.S. and to civilian life, Okie picked his music career up again, but this time he joined Little Jimmy Dickens' road band, working alongside such notable musicians as steel guitar player Buddy Emmons. Okie played in Little Jimmy's band until around 1956 when he went to work in Detroit as part of Casey Clark's Lazy Ranch Boys. It was during this time that he recorded 2 songs as a solo artist for Sage and Sound Records. After his work with Clark and the Lazy Ranch Boys, Okie returned to Texas and worked the Red River Jamboree in Paris, Texas. He continued performing in the late 50s, even playing the Louisiana Hayride. But that major record deal and major hit and the chance for stardom eluded him. And by the way, Okie was also a songwriter, and he actually composed a lot of the songs he recorded. He also co-wrote Strictly Nothin' with Frankie Miller, who recorded the song for Starday Records in 1960. Okie moved away from Texas in the 1960s and concentrated his connections in Nashville. He worked as Marty Robbins' bus driver as well as his business counselor in an unofficial capacity. He worked with Robbins for 10 years and then later drove the bus for Hank Williams Jr. for 5 years. I imagine Okie saw a thing or two driving that bus for old Hank. Okie recorded his last single in 1966 for Red Wortham's Sir Speed record label, which was based outside of Nashville and Bon Aqua, Tennessee. After Okie's retirement from the music business, Okie enjoyed working on his farm and lived outside of Nashville in Reedyville, Tennessee with his wife Madeline, whom he had married in 1985. Sounds like Okie got to enjoy some of the finer and quieter things in life and stay around the farm. By the late 80s and 90s, Okie Jones was hardly remembered outside of hardcore country music record collectors. By the way, speaking of records, there are some Okie Jones recordings available on YouTube if you'd like to go take a listen to Okie Jones. I was partial to the song Send Me a Penny Postcard. In 2012, Okie attended the release event of Marty Robbins' biography, 20th Century Drifter, at the Country Music Hall of Fame. The biography was written by Diane Diekman, and Okie had contributed valuable information for the book through a phone interview with Diane. Okie Jones died on November the 20th, 2017, at his home in Reedyville, Tennessee, at the age of 87 years old. Okie lived a long, full life, recording for a major record label like Columbia Records. He played on legendary stages like the Big D Jamboree and Louisiana Hayride. He worked with Grand Ole Opry star Little Jimmy Dickens and drove the bus for country music icons Marty Robbins and Hank Williams Jr. He also took time to serve in the United States military during the time of war. Okie Jones, one of country music's unknown legends.